Martin, thank you for joining me today. So for anyone who is new for tobacco harm reduction, please could you introduce yourself and your background and your career to date and what your current work involves, please?
Yeah, I've been writing about harm reduction, about vaping for 15 years now. I think the first article I wrote was in 2009. I ran a transport company up until 2021 when I sold it, and I advocated in my spare time. But now I've sold my business and sold the premises and sold the assets and everything. So I've got more time to advocate. So I'm sort of acting almost like a consultant. I've got a contract at the moment with the Taxpayers Protection Alliance in Washington, DC. Yeah, it gives me time to do things and talk to as many consumers as I can. That's what I've tended to be doing. I'm a consumer myself, and it's nice to talk to consumer advocates from all over the world. And I've met a lot of them in the last couple of years. I hope to meet many more.
Yeah, I have to say you are an extremely productive consumer advocate, and your content is superb. So it's a pleasure to
Thanks.
see you so busy in this space, and to see your output. But you did recently participate during the COP10 week in Panama in February, where your involvement was to actually be there on the ground as part of the Taxpayers Alliance or Protection Alliance. And you and your team did a daily live stream from one of the central hotels titled Good Cop, Bad Cop, which was certainly one of the key resources that we at THR.net used to keep updated on what was happening during COP10 week, etc. Can you please explain in more detail what Good Cop, Bad Cop really was, and which guests you had, and what was the live stream hoping to achieve?
Well, the idea came about, the president of the Taxpayers Protection Alliance, TPA. He wanted to go to Panama. He's not keen on WHO. His father died of smoking related diseases, and he doesn't really like the WHO's attitude. So he wanted to go over there because he knows about all of the things we all know about the COP meetings. The public isn't allowed in. The media is carefully, heavily vetted and carefully selected. Only people who agree with the true faith of the WHO's FCTC treaty are allowed to have a say. And we wanted to set up an event of our own for the same week to talk about, have the discussions that aren't being had at the WHO's COP meetings. So that's what we did. We set up a full program of events over 5 days. We invited a load of experts, scientists, doctors, consumers, policy experts, and we got them all to Panama to chat about harm reduction and maybe the deficiencies of the WHO. And yeah, it was a good panel. It's very well received. I think we had over 24, 25 experts from about 14 different countries. And I think every continent except Africa Africa was included because we had Kurt Yo from South Africa. I think we covered just about every continent. And it was a great event. The people who came said that they really enjoyed it. They're glad it happened. They're glad it was there because it was an important thing to push back on the WHO. And one of the things we wanted to do is make sure that WHO saw that we were there. And we knew that they saw we were there because 2 or 3 webinars before the event were talking about our event coming up, and they were saying they've even booked a whole hotel, as if the way they insinuate that was they booked a whole hotel, so it must be big tobacco, mustn't it? As if do they have computers? You can just go online and go to a hotel and book rooms yourself, can't you, these days? It's not difficult. So we didn't organise the experts' travel. They organised their own travel. We just told them we'll reimburse you up to a certain amount, and that's it. Because the TPA hasn't got a massive budget, and many of them they spent more getting over there than the reimbursement we could afford to give them. But they came anyway, and they came a long way. Kurt Yo from South Africa, 38 hours it took him to get there. And Conor Malloy from New Zealand, I think he was similar. I think he was about 35 hours to get to Panama. But they all came. And they went away. There was some great discussions, and it was well received by people watching at home, people at the venue. We had plenty of journalists there. We had loads of Latin American consumers and come to Panama for the event. So yeah, we were really quite proud that we did it.
Yeah, that's quite an amazing achievement to get that many experts from that many countries to come and to have them even partially self-fund that. That obviously means that they really believe in what and why they're doing it, and actually that they really buy into what you're doing and the Taxpayers Protection Alliance. And so it's a massive achievement. And one of the sessions on the agenda was titled, "What are the policies around the world concerning the regulation of both combustible cigarettes and tobacco harm reduction products?" Which is quite an interesting topic for this area. Can you please iterate the complexity that exists when it comes to regulating these products?
Well, it's a bit of a mishmash, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah,
just one example is the difference in regulations between, countries which approach regulation in a systematic manner. We have the UK and the USA, and USA products have to be pre-authorized, so they have to submit plans of what they want to sell and everything, and then the FDA, Food and Drug Administration, will look through the application and decide whether they're allowed to sell it or not. Whereas in the UK, we have a notification system, which is where the government or government body, or in this case, the Medicines Healthcare Products Regulatory Authority, it's hard to say, MHRA, they'll say, look, these are the things that you're not allowed to put in it. These are the things we want you to have tested. These are the standards that we expect of you. And if you follow all those, just send us the details of the products and we'll look over it. As long as there's nothing too awry, then we'll let you sell them within 6 months, or I think it will, or 6 weeks. I can't remember offhand. But so one is saying, the UK is saying, look, you have to get over this bar and then it's fine. Whereas the USA is saying, we want to look at every single thing and we're going to check over every single one of these products. Not good to say, we know these products are okay, but just tell us what's in them. And all that. It's two different things. But then you've got other countries where it's just all over the place. Some of them don't have anything. A lot of African countries have no regulations at all. And you've got other places where they just don't like the sound of it and they ban them. I mean, Brazil banned vaping products in 2011. I mean, no one knew anything about them then. Now we do know a lot more about them. But what we have seen is in some of the Asian countries and some of the Latin American countries, they're starting to revisit this and saying, look, maybe we were a bit quick off the mark with that. And you do have countries that are now thinking, if we regulate them, we can tax them. And maybe there is something in these products. Maybe they can help people quit smoking. The most dramatic of which, of course, is the Philippines, which at COP9, it came just after Bloomberg funded people were trying to write their regulations for them and infiltrating into the government, and that got found out, and there was a big furore about it in the Philippines. Turns out it's against the constitution, and they just flipped. 1 minute they were going to ban everything, and they flipped and said, you know what, we're going to regulate these products now. And they've continued to be going down that path. And at COP10, they made a country statement saying we believe in harm reduction, and that's why we're going to regulate these products as consumer products, because we think they can help people quit smoking. So there's lots of different approaches, but when governments look at it properly, they accept, like, even though it's a bad process in the US and they're holding up thousands of products in this regulatory limbo, they do accept as a principle that vaping is less harmful than smoking. They just have concerns about vaping and they want to put some barriers up. But yeah, so some of the smaller countries are coming around to the idea. There are some that are just digging their heels in, and some countries that are going the other way. But it is a mishmash. But hopefully over time they'll realise that these products can integrate into a tobacco control strategy and use lower nicotine products to get people off smoking, which is where the harm is, obviously.
yeah. I think that's a nice example that you highlighted, the Philippines and how far they've come since, COP9 or pre-COP9. Can you think of another country that has a more risk proportionate approach to taxation on products?
Well, it's sad when you hear that nicotine pouches and products like that are being taxed by a number of European countries now. But at least they're not going over the top.
How about Sweden? Can you think, because
Well,
Sweden seems to have a more risk proportionate approach to taxation, do you think?
yeah, they've
Yeah.
said they're gonna cut the tax on snus. They're putting up the tax on cigarettes, and they're cutting the tax on snus, I think.
Yeah.
So I'm not privy to why they've made that decision, but hopefully, we hope it's because they recognise the massive difference in risk between the two, and that they properly recognise the value of snus for harm reduction in their country. Because often it seems that the government in Sweden are not. It's almost like they're embarrassed that snus is helping them to go smoke free. They don't really promote it too much outside of their country. But we've had this natural experiment between Sweden and the rest of Europe for well, since 1995, haven't we? Where Sweden has snus and the rest of the countries haven't, and they're beating us by a country mile on reducing smoking and smoking related diseases. I think their cancer rates are 40% lower than the rest of Europe. So yeah, they've kind of gone that way. But at the same time, we've got the UK going the other way. Some of the stupid stuff that's coming out from my country at the moment. And we have got a government which is being pilloried all over, and seems to be not being able to do anything right, and is about to be turfed out very embarrassingly, according to the polls, by its electorate. But you know, how can you go from a beacon to the rest of the world in the UK to coming out with a policy which says they're going to tax vaping products so strongly that I think it would be the second largest tax in the EU, apart from, or in Europe, apart from, I think it was Montenegro or something. So we've gone from fairly accepting of the continuum of risk and understanding the difference between cigarettes and vaping products, to a government that doesn't seem to know what it's doing with them.
Complete 180 on the direction it was going.
Yeah.
Let's just talk briefly about LMICs. I know you mentioned Africa, but on that train of thought. So this group obviously is usually at a disadvantage when it comes to accessing high quality healthcare and options for smoking cessation, etc. And let's admit that smoking is still a large burden in these countries, but Ash UK quotes in one of their fact sheets, it is estimated that tobacco will have killed around 40 million people in the developed world between 2005 and 2030. In the developing world, this number is more than 3 times higher at around 135 million. Although smoking prevalence is decreasing in some LMICs, relatively high levels of population growth in the developing world means that the number of smokers, and thus the number of attributable deaths and illnesses, will continue to rise. So your panel session discussed the fact that tobacco control groups are in fact failing LMICs by preventing access to alternative products. Can you provide any examples of where the WHO or tobacco control groups are doing this?
Well, we know that Bloomberg-funded groups are in a lot of countries. We've kind of worked out that they're in the UK now. They're all over the place. But my colleague in America, Lindsay Stroud, she did some research about a year ago, looking at where Bloomberg money is being sent to in low and middle income countries, and found out that about the only countries that they're not going into is the ones with state-owned tobacco industry. So maybe they think, well, it's not worth it with them because you know, they're going to push their cigarettes anyway. So, but elsewhere they're going into, you know, these low income countries and almost writing regulations for them. And that's a bit of an attraction for those countries because they've got many things to worry about, and they don't want to have to start regulations about products which some countries they're there and some countries they're not. You know, especially in Africa, if you go there with a vaping product, some of the infrastructure isn't going to make that product particularly useful for people who smoke. You know, charging things up and that kind of thing. But a product like a nicotine pouch, though, which is so simple, that could work, especially with some of the substances that people already use. You know, the weird tobacco kind of thing that's used in India and sub-Saharan places. So there are different products that could work in those places. And most importantly, as Ash kind of pointed out there, 80% of the world's smokers are in low and middle income countries. That's where we need to be targeting these products. But the regulations in those countries can be a bit of a mishmash, and they're not particularly evidence-based. The WHO is lying to them all over the place. So yeah, that's a big battle for the future, and somewhere where there's great potential for some incredible improvements in public health in lower middle income countries. We just need to get those ideas into the governments in those countries, and hopefully they'll recognise the potential that they could be getting out of it.
Yeah, I think some really good points there. And in terms of the outcome of COP10 itself, do you have any comments or thoughts on that?
Well, we just published a podcast that me and Lindsay did with Chris Snowdon, and he called it a defensive win. I think there was a lot of worries that the WHO were going to throw the kitchen sink at reduced risk products because they hadn't met together. This is the first meeting together they'd had since I think it was Geneva in 2018, because COP9 was virtual because of the pandemic, and then we were meant to be having, or they were meant to be having COP10 in November, and then, well, their reason for postponing it was apparently unrest in Panama. We're not too sure about that. We maybe think it was more to do with contracts that they didn't get right for the venue, but for whatever reason, they had to hold it in February, and it was noticeable that instead of the 190 odd delegations, there were lots of empty seats, and the FCTC Secretariat head Adriana Marquito Blanco said that they had 142 delegations. So we know that it wasn't a full complement. So you can't really make a lot of decisions if you haven't got all of those countries there. It runs on consensus. So if you're losing people, you reduce your chances of coming to consensus on anything. So they always say it was historic decisions. They made some decisions that were pretty mundane. Article 19 on liability, Article 18 on environment, and Article 2.1, which is just something that has always been in the treaty anyway. They just sort of focused on it, but there was nothing really earth-shattering. There was nothing really. I mean, they were discussing novel and emerging products, but that could have come out with some sort of proposals for moving forward. It could have come out with working groups or some way of advancing the agenda to try and ban those products, but that didn't materialize. And even on Articles 9 and 10, which is to do with testing and emissions, ostensibly that's just about combustible tobacco products, but there were some reports that went on that agenda item which were hinting at the way they were going to maybe go for nicotine pouches and other products, harm reduction products. But that didn't really happen because they couldn't stop discussing it. That it's been pushed out to COP11, and we had St. Kitts and Nevis, one of the smaller nations in the Caribbean, put forward a proposal saying that if we're talking about testing emissions and you're talking about maybe widening the net of those articles to other products, then we need to talk about Article 1D and harm reduction, and you should be taking more account of that. And they discussed this for 5 days, didn't come to any decision, and have had to say we'll come back and talk about it again in COP11, which is to be held somewhere undetermined right now because they didn't get any offers for hosting it. So we don't know where the next one's going to be.
Yes, talking about COP11 actually. So how are you and the TPPA going to be preparing for COP11 yourselves, and when will you start?
Well, we started talking about it already. The first question is, where's it going to be held? We don't know. So, I mean, I'd say we have to plan that it's going to be in Geneva until we're told otherwise, because that's what it would revert to. They need some country to come and offer to host it, and I think they prefer to be hosted in another country. But yeah, I think this is the first time they weren't able to announce the next host of the COP because they didn't have any applications. Whether that's just, some countries may have thought, look, what do we get out of this? We paid millions. I think it came out in advance of COP10 that Panama were paying over $5 million, I think, to put on the event. But what do they get out of that? They get a few delegates, but they don't get anything particularly to help their tourism industry. They're not building infrastructure on the back of it or anything. It's just this, and they can't really tell much of the world about it because the world's not interested. The journalists aren't there to report on it. Most people, if you talk to them in the street, do you know about these all over the world. Do you know about this Conference of the Parties meeting about talking about tobacco? No, never heard of it. So there's all downsides really. So you can understand why a country
Yeah.
would be too happy to apply to host it. But yeah, it's going to be in probably the end of next year, November 2025, we're guessing.
Yeah.
And
It's interesting because
presumably,
so interesting because other large meetings like the environmental one that everyone knows about those, all the other
yeah,
big ones, but the tobacco one, it's like it's not even mentioned, no one knows.
yeah, that's right.
So yeah, sorry to
But
cut you off anyway, carry on.
no, that's right. No, but yeah, so yeah, we've spoken about it already, and I think we're the last one, COP10, or good COP10, went so well. I think and that was the first time the TPA had ever hosted a meeting or arranged a meeting or a conference, and it went really well. So we know how
Oh,
to
that
do
was
it.
the first time.
Yeah, first
That
time.
was
So
incredible. You did a
yeah,
great job.
so we know how to do it now. So why not do one for COP11?
I was going to say, my question is, are you going to be doing that same thing again for COP11? You've got to now, right?
Yeah, I expect so. I expect so
Mm,
because it's still going to be needed, unless the
yeah,
WHO has a massive change of mind and decides to invite consumers along to have discussions. But I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon, is it? So there's still going to be a need for a
yeah.
good cop to mirror the bad cop, to speak about issues that matter to consumers, because the official cop isn't doing that.
It's amazing you got such a huge turnout for your first one. I assumed you'd done other ones previous years. I thought you'd seasoned at this.
No, no,
It's
we
amazing.
we actually had more for November. I think we had about
Oh,
27, 28.
you did, yes.
But
Good.
of course, once the dates were moved, people said, "Look, I can't make that date," and that's not just
Yeah,
us. We had it, but we pulled other people in, to fill the gaps. But that's probably what happened with the official COP10, because, like I said, there was officially meant to be 1,900 delegates. I think there was
mm,
only 1,200 in the end, and there was supposed to be 190 delegations. There were only 142, so they
yeah,
might have the same thing. We've heard anyway that most of the UK delegation didn't go, whereas they were going to go in November. But when you have people who are in positions of authority, they have packed calendars. You can't just say, "Oh, we're not doing that in November, but come along at the start of February instead," because they'll say, "I've got other things to do then, haven't I?"
yeah, exactly. So my last question then is
Mhm.
on the EU TPD review. You've been quite involved in this, as you were telling me earlier. Would you mind giving a brief summary about how you are trying to get some involvement from consumers for the EU TPD review and any timelines you can shed light on?
Well, we know it's going to be reviewed,
Mhm.
and we've heard some of the hints of what they're going to be talking about and what they're planning, and it doesn't look good at all. It could
Is
be
there
an
a date
absolute
for that
cluster.
review? Sorry to cut you off. Is there like an approximate date for that review?
We don't know, but we know they're starting to talk about it now. So
Okay,
it's
okay.
a long process, but they
Yeah.
are starting to talk about it. But and it looked to be around about the time of COP9 and COP10 that they were almost working hand in glove with the WHO. They would have loved it if COP10 had produced a load of guidelines, because then they could say, "Oh, look, it's not us, it's the WHO. We've got to put these in the TPD review."
Mm.
But we don't know, but we do know that they're not happy about nicotine pouches. We know that they want to ban flavors. We know all these things. Um, and because they want to refight the battles. They're still stinging from TPD2, which came out in was it 2014, where they wanted to medicalize all vaping products, and they lost out, and they had to regulate them as consumer products because of the Parliament fighting them over it. And we know they've smarted about that ever since, and they want to fight the same battles again. So they're going to try that. They're getting advice. We know this from people in Australia. They've had sort of conference with people like that. So we need to sort of get it into their minds that consumers are around, and we won't stand for it, and we'll fight them like we did 10 years ago. So, and we need to do it early, because you've got the elections start next month. I think the campaign for the European election starts on April the 12th. So we need to get across to them while they're still looking for votes. Say, well, don't forget about us. We
Mm.
vote. A lot of us vote based on what governments do with our products, because lot of consumers think, well, this thing saved my life. If you're going to come along and take it away from me, I'm not going to vote for you. So we need to do that campaign. I've been talking to some people behind a website, clearingtheair.eu, which is where, what the not opposition, I suppose you could call it opposition. The opposition to the proposals in the last TPD came from people on forums, vapers forums. That's where we discussed a lot of stuff and where we energized things and collaborated and worked out what we could do. But those forums don't really exist now. Most people are just on social media, which is much more atomized. So the idea is to get consumers together, have discussions and say, look, what are we going to do about this? What's happening with your country? What allies have you got? What threats have you got? People who threaten it, and just come together as consumers and work towards fighting anything bad that comes out of the TPD review.
So if I'm a consumer and I'm quite new to this tobacco harm reduction space and I want to make my voice known, if I want to get involved, how would I reach out to your movement? How would I get involved in practical terms?
Well, the website is
Yeah,
for people who want to spend time advocating. We welcome those. And
clearingtheair.eu, just to
clearingtheair.eu. Yeah, and
yeah.
the idea is you join it and you put on a mailing list. You put in touch with other advocates, and there's a members area so you can discuss things. There are resources we put together about who you should write to in your country for the EU. Guide you, because that's the main thing, isn't it? Is to get consumers out of things like social media where you're just chatting to yourselves a lot of the time, and actually get your thoughts to people who matter. And at the moment, when there's an election campaign just about to start, and the elections are in June for the European Parliament,
Yeah.
the idea is that by the time of the elections, that they'll know that the consumers are around. And they'll know that if you're going to be elected, you better not plan to mess us around, because we won't vote for you.
It will get involved, Martin. So we can go on there, sign up. I mean, we have consumers that work in Health Diplomat, so we can definitely submit a few letters from us. I can do one. We've got a guy called Brian who works on social media, but he's a very passionate consumer. So we can definitely do some things ourselves. And I'll let you know that when we've done it.
But the main thing is, and I've been saying this for years and years, every panel I ever do in front of consumers, I'll say it, just never be complacent, because there are always threats, and you must write to your politicians, your elected politicians, or write to your government, however your government works in the country that you're involved with. You know how you're supposed to get hold of people who run your government, or your politicians. Write to them and tell them that you're around. And for years in the UK, I was told, oh, we don't have to worry in the UK because the government's got our back. Nothing's going to happen to vaping in the UK. And yet in the last few weeks, we've had proposals for a vape tax. Where they've banned disposable vapes. They're talking about banning flavors.
Been quite a shock though.
Yeah, and they're talking about putting vapes behind screens and putting them on prescription. This has happened. I always just said, look, it only takes a little in politics for switch things the other way. You must always be wary that things. Yeah. Just you've got to be vigilant. Make sure
That's
that
a really good
I've been
point.
told, no, it's fine. The UK's fine. Well, look at the UK. So anyone in Europe should think, don't be complacent. Don't think that the EU is going to be okay with vaping and nicotine pouches and anything else. It could do whatever it damn likes if people don't talk to them and say don't do it. So you need to get involved and make your voice heard. Write to them over and over again. Just make sure they know you're there, because that's how we won last time. It was MEPs had never had a post bag as big as they had for that debate over vaping products. All over Europe, they were getting loads and loads of emails and messages and letters from consumers, and that's what swayed it in the end. So we've got to do that again.
Fantastic. That's amazing. Okay, so we know where to go then, and very well said. Thank you so